And so in these waning hours, my thoughts turn to a passage from the Gerun Oracles. In the beginning, before myth and legend, before light and dark, there was but the sea. In the beginning, before man and history, light and dark were divided, the sea sundered in 14. To the seas she cast her children, for fear of the moon. For hate of the star, to the seas he cast his doom. May we ever walk in the light of the crystal. At the end of February last year, I did a video on my inferences regarding the cosmogony and the metaphysics of the Final Fantasy XIV universe, how it is structured, and how it came into being. The evidence and sources we had to work with at that time were a little less than they are now, and with Yoshida's New Year's tradition of sharing a passage from the journal of Archon Leveilleur with us on the lodestone, I think we have the perfect opportunity to return to the subject. Gerun appears to corroborate with most everything I've said previously, but he also gives us here plenty of fuel to elaborate on the theory. So I'd like to separate Gerun's account of creation into 4 distinct moments or beats and analyze them in turn. Firstly, there was but the sea. This evokes to us the common theory in evolutionary science of the primordial sea within which the first multicellular life forms developed. The Eorzean equivalent is something we've heard about often enough from the Charlayans, the ethereal sea from which ether, the atomism or building blocks of all energy and matter, ebbs and flows. But rather than being a purely historical concept like the primordial sea, it continues to envelop and penetrate the noumenal spaces that lie between being and not being. The second beat is the establishment of dualism. Light and dark were divided. The purest physical form of ether is a crystal, and so I have posited before that the actual phenomena of this moment was probably a tiny pocket of this formless sea crystallizing. Where we previously had no things to speak of, just a formless qua, we now have 2 things, or at least a thing and a nothing. And given that this new thing, this crystal, had nothing to cause it, we arrive at a conclusion that many people have about the first causer of our own universe, that it caused itself, and that it is conscious. All that this crystal has done so far is create itself, so all we can say of it is that it is creative, and all that we can say of everything else is that it is not. Let us return to our metaphor of the ocean. If we were to toss a rock or crystal into an endless, turbulent sea, the sea would gradually cause the crystal to erode. If the ethereal sea behaves in the same way, all that it is doing in this second beat, this first moment in time, is beginning to erode the crystal, to break it apart. So if we were to similarly attribute a consciousness to the ocean, we could say only that it is destructive, that it yearns for the crystal to surrender its ether and be ground into dust. This is the first conflict, the first battle that wages still today. The crystal is drawing from the ether to build itself up, to continue to crystallize and grow, whilst concurrently being battered and eroded by the ocean currents. The third beat is a little more difficult. The sea sundered in 14. I'm sure some people are already speculating that this 14 refers to 14 gods created by the crystal, the 12, 13 if we count Nuld and Thol as separate entities, and finally Zodiac to make 14, outcast by the other gods out of fear to reflect his role in Final Fantasy XII and motivate a quest for revenge against all of creation. I think that this is a possibility, but I'm still inclined to believe what we've been told with a wealth of evidence by Gaius, Laha, Brea, and Midgardsamur, that the 12 are no less a figment of mortal imagination than the primals are. There is a more elegant explanation for the sea being sundered in 14 that also accounts for another extremely important part of Final Fantasy XIV's metaphysics. It's also going to get a little dense, so bear with me. So what exactly is being sundered? We have already established that the sea is in fact pure and unfiltered ether. All of the ether that is constituent of our star Hydaelyn is aspected within a wheel of 6 elements: ice, water, wind, lightning, fire, and earth. At this point, we can think of the crystal dispersing pure ether into these elements in the same way that a dispersive prism handles white light. It becomes a little more complicated when we recognize that these elements can also have a polarity towards astral or umbral. The cult of the 12 can show us the common Eorzean understanding of elemental polarity, with each deity corresponding to both an element and a pole. Halone is associated with ice and astral, Menfina with ice and umbral, Thaliarch and Nemea with water and astral and umbral, respectively, and so on. What we have to do now is substitute our elemental wheel with an elemental sphere. Each of the 6 elements corresponds to a discrete longitude, whilst astral and umbral are the latitudinal poles. By this model, we have 12 distinct elements, each of the 6 with the potential to lean towards either the astral or umbral hemispheres, and 2 forms of pure ether with no elemental leaning: perfect umbral and perfect astral ether, light and dark, star and moon, Hydaelyn and zodiac. This is what we have when we sunder the sea, the ethereal sea, in 14. So the effect of the crystal on the ethereal sea is not only dispersive, it is birefringent. What this means is that we have 2 polarized images of an elemental spectrum, an astral ray and an umbral ray, one which we associate with light, the star and Hydaelyn, the other with darkness, the moon and zodiac. Between them, they make up all the energy and matter of creation. The spherical model also gives us an explanation for the difference between an elemental crystal and a crystal of light or darkness. Throughout A Realm Reborn, the Warrior of Light collected crystals of light aspected to each of the 6 elements, and this was for me a matter of some confusion. What exactly is the difference between an elemental crystal and an elemental crystal of light? If we take the example of fire, I believe that we could consider a crystal to be perfectly aspected to the fire element if it resides anywhere on the exact fire longitude, but it becomes a fire crystal of light only when it is as close as possible to the astral pole. Similarly, a fire crystal to the most extreme umbral latitude is a fire crystal of darkness. Thus is the Warrior of Light a person with the Echo in possession of light crystals centered perfectly on each elemental aspect, and the Warrior of Darkness is presumably a person with the Echo that possesses the same crystals of the umbral pole of darkness. We have seen through the Echo that the Warrior of Darkness we have recently encountered was once seemingly on the side of light. I believe that a part of his conversion to the darkness would have involved an artificial shift in the polarity of his crystals of light to darkness, in a similar way to which we have occasionally seen the aspect of an elemental crystal altered, say from fire to earth. Given that most sources in Eorzea associate umbral energy with the void, and the practice of void magic seems to confirm this belief, I believe that our world formed primarily from the astral spectrum of ether and the void from the umbral spectrum. The fact that we do see umbral energies throughout our own world is largely due to the reasonably common dissemination between our world and the void. Finally, we have beat 4. To the seas she cast her children, for fear of the moon. For hate of the star, to the seas he cast his doom. We have established by now that, at least to Gerun and the Archons, the great conflict of creative and destructive energies, light and dark, is symbolized by the star and the moon and characterized by Hydaelyn and Zodiac. Whether the star and the moon are literally the bodies of Hydaelyn and Zodiac is another matter. The way I understand these lines is that even though the destructive impulse of the Final Fantasy XIV universe, deified as Zodiac, emanates from the void, for denizens of our world, the moon appears the closest approximation. The Sharlayans and the Ascians treat the moon as a metonym for Zodiac, a dead and desolate simulacrum for what Hydaelyn will be if and when Zodiac is allowed to impose upon it. As for the children cast, I think that most people will assume this to be referring to the 12 and the age before the spoken tribes appeared in Eorzea. I believe it is quite possible that these first peoples of Hydaelyn were or included those that would later be venerated as the 12 gods of Eorzea, but I think that before they ascended into myth and idolatry, they were literally the ancestors of the peoples of Hydaelyn, the first life forms. The star cast them to the sea, recognizing that she was being eroded. Hydaelyn formed from the astral spectrum intelligent peoples that were naturally inclined to creation and construction that might outpace the currents. And so Zodiac in turn formed from the umbral spectrum life that was naturally chaotic and destructive, and that could in time destroy the crystal and cause everything to dissolve back into perfect nothingness. This explains her children and his doom. This leaves us with two great mysteries. What exactly are the Ascians, and who or what is or was Gerun? The Ascians share the motivation of Zodiac, but it is unclear whether they are native to our world or to the Void. Unlike the Void Sent, they destroy not through natural inclination, but because of a philosophical drive towards nihilism, something which Laha Brea in particular expressed many times. I believe that understanding the Echo is the key to understanding the Ascians, and this is something I intend to explore in a future video. As for Gerun, this name is another reference to Final Fantasy XII, in which he is the leader of the Ocuria, the immortal weavers of history and fate, which share many features with the Ascians. I don't have any sound theories yet, but I believe Gerun has inspired much of the Archon's understanding of the divine dualism of Hydaelyn and Zodiac, as opposed to the modern religious superstitions of the 12 or the Primals, and my first guess is that he is a pseudonym for the Ascian Elidibus. Hopefully we won't have to wait too many years to find out. Between now and then, I hope you all found this interesting and illuminating, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot. Check out my other videos on Final Fantasy XIV and more, and thank you so much for watching.